Hey patrons, welcome to another tutorial series, and in this one we're going to be doing a portrait in charcoal pencils. So we're going to be working on a portrait of Camila Cabello, and I thought this would be a good one to show you because she's got a different type of skin. We haven't done a portrait in charcoal for a while, so I thought this would be a great one to go through. So I'm just going to start off by showing you the materials that we're going to be using for this tutorial series. We're going to be using just charcoal pencils for this. We're not going to be using really graphite pencils. I'm going to have my mechanical pencil, but not lots of different grades of graphite. The two charcoal pencils we're using are a 2B charcoal pencil and also a 2H. So the 2B will be a lot softer than the 2H, so this is good to get in, the main dark shadows and to get in those darker values. And then you can go and add details with the 2H pencil because it is a lot harder. For the actual highlights, we're going to be using the Tombow Mono Eraser. I use this one a lot. I've just put in a new refill into it. So you can buy them separately if you run out. You don't have to buy this thing every single time. I'm going to be using a few blending stumps for blending the small areas or for getting some darker blending and darker shadows. So I've just got a range of them in different sizes. For softer areas like the skin, I've got a little paintbrush, a size 4 round Aquafine Daler-Rowney brush. I usually use this for watercolours, but I'm just going to use this for the charcoal today, just to brush it around and get in those smooth values. And I'm also going to be using, for those larger areas, some tissue to blend if we need it as well. So that's pretty much all the supplies we're using. Like I mentioned, we will be using potentially to get in some really light fine details using the Faber-Castell 0.5mm 2B mechanical pencil. It's just got some 2B leads in there as well, so we can use these for the lighter details. But I don't want to go too hard with them because I don't want to have any shine on my piece. I did use that pencil to actually sketch out the outline for this one, and the sketch outline image as well as the reference image are attached for you guys. I do feel like this is a bit echoey. I am in my new house now. This is the first recording that I'm doing in my new room. So if it's sounding a bit too echoey, I might try and get some panels to put on the walls to try and absorb that so it's not as echoey. So I'll look into that for the future for you guys. And like I said, I will be doing like a room tour and everything like that very, very soon. But let's get straight into this drawing, and we are starting off with the eyes. If you guys have been around for a while and know me long enough, you'll probably realise that I always like to start with the eyes, and that is just a personal preference. In terms of smudging, it's probably not the best thing to start with the eyes, but I do like to get in the eyes first because I think that's the most unique feature on a portrait. And if you get the eyes right, I think you can tell very early on who the person looks like, so I think it makes for a great start to the portrait. So I am going in with that 2B charcoal pencil, the slightly softer one, and I'm just going to use that to get in the darkest parts on the eyes. I have put that in a pencil extender now, and I'm just going to use that to get in these darker areas. I'm going to avoid adding it to the highlighted areas so that we keep them nice and bright, because charcoal is a lot harder than graphite to actually erase. And I'm not applying lots of pressure at all for this layer. I'm just lightly blocking that in. Really take your time with this. Look at the shape of the highlights. Just going to add some shadow to the waterline for this darker area. The waterline of her eyes is quite dark. And also above for the eyelashes and that upper lash line going into the upper crease, just add some shadow on there. Just shading in some of that shadow. I'm also going to add the shadow for the eyebrows. I'm just blocking in the main darkest areas for the moment, not worrying too much about the detail or the mid-toned areas. Just dealing with the darkest parts, blocking them in. You can see for the eyebrow, I'm still not doing it as a block shape, though I am trying to do it with the direction the eyebrow hairs are going in. And I'm not doing it the same darkness all of the way around. So now that I've blocked in those areas, I'm going to go in with the little blending stump and just blend some of that over onto the mid-toned areas, firstly on the upper eyelid. If you do want a less intense look, you can use the brush, that will give you a softer look. If you want it to be more sort of airbrush, not have such harsh edges, then that could be a good one for you to use. Like here towards the edge, I might just go in and soften that out. Lightly dust some charcoal over these more mid-toned areas. You can use the brush just to add sort of a base layer, like I will with the white of the eye, add a base layer. You can use the tissue to lighten it if it gets a bit too dark. And also to soften it up a bit more. Also use the brush to add some of the charcoal underneath the eye. All the way down here. Be careful not to add too much. But also don't be afraid to go dark enough. Okay, I'm going to go back in with that little blending stump. Use this to add some of those darker shadows and create a bit more definition. So I find that charcoal is great if you want to do quick studies, quite quick portrait sketches. It's great for stuff like that. You can also use it for more polished off sketches and drawings. I do prefer it to graphite because of the fact that it has no shine. That's a big positive for me, but it can be a bit more messy. I'm just going to build up some more layers on this crease to create a bit more definition, add more shadow on the eyelid as well. And I'm just going into that second rendering stage now that I've got all of the shadows and midtones blocked in. I'm not worrying about the highlights for the moment. I'm going to use the Tombow Mono Eraser to do them later on, once I've finished all of the shadows in the eye. Adding more shadow in the eyebrow. Adding some of those darkest hairs. And a little bit of shading for the shadow. There we go. Use the tissue if you want to soften anything out. Blow away the excess. Just add some darker shadow on the upper eyelid. Just blend with the tissue. So I'm just blending the pupil again because I don't want to see the texture of the charcoal. I want the pupil and the iris to be nice and smooth and soft. Just going to add a few eyelash strokes so you can see the direction that the eyelashes are going in. That's important. It's really important to get in those subtle details like the direction of the eyelashes and eyebrows. Also adding that darker border so we know the colour that's going against the skin, so it's easier to judge our values. So I'm just blocking that in. It's all quite dark for the hair. And it's easier to see if you've gone a bit too light and left it light, which I think is the case here. So I'm just darkening up certain areas. Because she has got a slightly darker skin tone, it's important to get those colours right, to get the values right, so the skin doesn't look too light or too dark. Also adding some darker shadows in the white of the eye. And that's another thing, the white of the eye can have quite a bit of shading in it and lots of little veins as well as highlights. But remember, we're not doing the highlights yet because there's no point, because we just end up blending over them. So I'm just building up more and more of the shadows at the moment. Again, use the tissue to lighten up any areas you're not happy with and blend it out. Just going to add the bottom eyelashes as well now. Now that I've got in this sort of area, once I've finished that, just add in the eyelashes. And adding them on the top. Just adding more shadow for the iris as well. Okay, so I'm just going to go in now with my mechanical pencil and just use that to add some little details like the veins on the white of the eye. Just add these little subtle veins. Just helps add with the realism to get in these details. Like I've been saying a lot recently in a recent video on my YouTube channel, I've done a video about this where I talk about the 4 sort of key factors for a realistic drawing, and one is the accurate sketch outline to start with. The second is a good contrast with the highlights and the shadows. The third is color choice, which obviously here isn't that tricky because it's just black and white. And the last thing is looking out for detail. And so it is important to observe the reference and try to include all of the important details that you need. You don't have to include every single detail, but it's important to include a certain amount of detail and try as hard as you can to study the reference and pick out that detail. So now I want to go in with my Tombow Mono Eraser and just use this to add all of the little watery highlights on the surface. This will really help make the eye pop, and I like the Tombow Mono Eraser because of the fact that it is so thin. You can get in a lot of these details. It lifts the charcoal well, and it's just really good for the highlights. So I'm just using it. I'm looking at the shape of these highlights because it's important, and looking at how they curve with the eye. That's important as well. Mainly there's these ones that are on top of the iris. So I'm just looking at all of the little tiny highlights, even just the subtle ones. I'm trying to get in. Just adjusting the actual shape of the highlights. Just using a paintbrush just to soften out this shadow. So use it to add some shadow above the eyebrow. Set the sort of main value for this area. And also just a little bit for the skin below. Just being very soft with this. Okay, so I'm going to leave this eye for now and just move over and do the other eye. We've pretty much got this one finished. And so again, do the exact same thing, going in with the 2B charcoal and just blocking in these darkest areas. Because she's got very dark eyes, the iris is pretty much just going to be this black sort of colour. We can use the Tombow Mono Eraser just to add subtle highlights. And when we blend it out, because it lightens it up a bit when we blend with the blending stump, once we then add the second layer of charcoal, we can add it just to a few different areas so that then we'll have a few different tones. But for now, I'm pretty much just shading this all over. Even on that waterline. Add in the dark eyelashes as well. All going mainly down into the white of the eye. Also doing the same thing again with the eyebrow. There is hair coming and cutting across the eyebrow, so you can't see the whole of the eyebrow. Again, I'm focusing on the direction. You don't have to get in every single detail at the moment, but it is important to get in a hint of the direction of the eyebrow, just so that it doesn't end up looking like a uniformed block of shading. Okay, now I'm going to go in with that blending stump again, that small one, and start to blend everything out, get rid of this grainy look, avoiding that white highlight. I'm going to avoid going back and forth with the blending stump, just start at one end and sweep across to the other. Because if you go back and forth, you're going to end up with start and stop points. Just blending out the eyebrow, going in the direction of the hairs as I blend. Okay, so I'm lightly just going to wipe off the blending stump so there isn't so much excess charcoal on there. Blow away all of the extra little bits, and I'm just going to start to use this to add some shading inside the white of the eye, very lightly. Okay, now I'm going to switch over to that paintbrush and use that to get in all of this shading on the skin. I'm not adding any charcoal to the actual paintbrush. I'm just using the charcoal from other areas of the drawing and using that to blend and add shading to these other areas. I'm not like creating or dipping the paintbrush in charcoal powder. I'm just using what's already on the paper. And actually, I'm not worrying about getting the skin too smooth because there is a slight sort of texture there. Adding a base layer across the whole thing. So if it's not getting it dark enough, switch over to a blending stump to add more shading. And if you want more defined edges, use the blending stump. Blend it out with a tissue. And so now I'm going to go in with the 2H pencil and start to add a light bit of shading. This is slightly harder, so it won't come off as much and as dark, so you can use it just to add these subtle shadows and then blend it out with the paintbrush or tissue, and it won't have too much texture to it. It actually creates a nice sort of skin texture over this paper. Also using it to darken up the upper crease. Imagine any little unique dots. There's a bit of hair going straight through the white of the eye. Just adding some more shading below the waterline. I want to make sure I'm getting this area dark enough. Even sometimes I struggle with getting the right contrast, and I need to keep looking over it, seeing if I need to go darker or lighter, because you don't always get it spot on straight away. You might need to slowly darken things up. So I'm just going to blend it out one more time. Again, starting with the upper crease. Using the stump for these darker areas. Try and maintain that shadow. Using a smaller stump to blend these smaller areas. And I'm also going to use the paintbrush just to add a bit of value above the eyebrow. Just to add a little bit, just sort of foundation value. Blend out all of these areas. You can also just use the paintbrush to blend the charcoal. Not even just to apply it, but also to blend it out and soften it. I wanted to have quite smoky, dark looking eyes, like in the reference. I like to make it nice and intense and dark. Okay, so going in again with the charcoal just to add in these individual detailed eyebrow hairs now, because at the moment there isn't much detail going on in the eyebrow. So I'm just trying to add a few details. There you go, lighten it up with the tissue. Once again, just adding these darker hairs going across the white of the eye. Now I'm adding the little eyelashes on the bottom lash line. First using the 2H pencil to get them as thin as possible. And because this is slightly lighter, what we can do is mark our eyelash hairs in with this and then go in with a 2B pencil just to add in the darkest parts. So go in with that 2B and just go over a few of the areas, mainly at the roots, just to add in these darkest parts. Also add in these hairs that are going across. Just use a paintbrush just to add value all in between. We'll work on that a bit later on. But for now, what I want to do is go in with my Tombow Mono eraser and just add in the little highlights again. Starting on the iris. Actually, first before I do that, I want to add some veins in with the mechanical pencil. Also just raise the shadow up here a bit. But yeah, firstly, this highlight is very bright. That's the main one. Also add in the little highlights into the eyebrow. And I'm just dotting it around on this highlighted area just to get in that sort of skin texture. Also bringing down the shadow on this side. So I'm going to add in some subtle highlights in the iris as well, just by lifting some of the colour, some of the charcoal with the Tombow Mono Eraser, and then going over it with the blending stump so it's more subtle. Just going to go around the shape of the highlight, shape it so it's accurate with the reference image. I'm just adding some little bright highlights. So I'm just going to lighten up parts of the waterline so it's not so dark all of the way across. Just lighten up the white of the eye as well. Just add in that little unique dot again. Anyway, so that is it for the eyes and for the first part. And so in the next part, we are going to be focusing on doing the nose. So that is it, and I'll see you in the next part. Bye, everybody.